All right, man.
George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. So we got a brother here who we feel good about. Dr. Shaun Nelms is the author of Leading with Purpose, Empowering Others to Create Lasting Change. Not change that lasts for a minute, but lasting change. Shaun
Right,
Nelms
that's right.
is an author. He's the vice president for community partnerships at the University of Rochester. He's also been a superintendent at the East and Lower Schools in Rochester, New York. He has done much work in this area. He's increased graduation rates. He has increased leadership within the schools that he has worked in. And by the way, he's got his own business, the Nelms Consulting Group, where he provides expertise and guidance on creating equitable school systems and effective admins that are and we are so glad that he's here, effective administrators. We're so glad that he's here to help us understand how to lead with purpose. And this is a good brother. I've got to know him over the past year or so. And I can tell you that the lessons that he has in this book will be something that you would want to pick up and have with your leadership team. So let's talk about your background. Tell me how you got to where you are.
Yeah, man. That's first of all, it's a pleasure and honor to be on the show, man. I think what you all are doing for this nation of folks who are like-minded is incredibly important, and it's inspirational, and it's something that we have to continue to lean into. So it's a pleasure to be asked to be on the show. How did I get to where I am? I think that's a pretty long-winded answer, but I'll try to do it in short fashion. I think anything that we do in life, I believe, has to be tied to some type of moral compass, moral purpose, moral principles, and set of values. And I grew up in a home that had centered our ability to help those around us. So, the desire and ability to help others doesn't come with a price. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be poor. It's got to be something that you have the internal desire to want to make the world better than you found it. And so my mom was a block club president. She was a PTA president. She was mother on the mother's board at church. Director in the choir. And so, as a youth, all I did was see my mother lead for others and with others.
Where's your
And
hometown?
so, Buffalo, New York. From Buffalo, New York, born and raised east side of Buffalo. A proud Buffalonian, proud Bills fan. But that community, much like Rochester, New York, where I did most of my professional work as a P-12 school teacher and educator and superintendent, very similar demographics. And so every day that I walked the halls of school systems, I saw myself, my siblings, my cousins, my neighbors in the eyes and through the experience of kids that I had the honor and privilege of serving. And so that's where I'm at. It's really been a life of servitude. It's been a life of self-discovery. It's been a life of trying to, again, enhance the communities that we live in so that we can change some of the generational issues that were bestowed upon us by those who wanted to keep us, marginalized throughout society.
Before we get to the book, I want to ask you, what are you seeing in some of those issues?
Yeah, I think there are many issues that we face from an educational standpoint. The issues that we face is a lack of systems. And so what happens in underserved communities is that we have a number of leadership changes that happen like yearly in some cases. When I was doing this work at East High School, let me just put that in context. East was the lowest performing school in the lowest performing district in New York State, the Rochester City School District. And in my 8 years there as superintendent of this school project, which we can talk about in a little bit, the RCSD, or the city school district superintendent, changed 7 times. So in my 8 times at one place, there were 7 different changes. So imagine how school leaders, how teachers, how parents or kids are constantly adjusting and shifting to a new set of standards or a different set of standards. And so you see that across this nation in predominantly rural and suburban and in urban districts where you have constant turnover in leadership, which means you have constant turnover in value and what drives that community to thrive. In suburban school settings, you typically have a stabilized school system where the superintendent is there 5 to 10 years. And so the community buys into the vision, the school board buys into the vision, and you can kind of track your progress differently. It doesn't mean those leaders are better or worse than the ones that are in rural or urban settings. They're just there long enough. And so the system adjusts to them, and it becomes more effective than it was when they found it. So the constant turnover, a lack of vision, a lack of structure, and I also say a lack of accountability. What gets measured gets done. And so if we're not able to measure progress in a consistent way that tracks kids over a number of years, not in a single data point, then it's almost impossible to get anything accomplished. And so I think a lack of stability, a lack of structure is an issue. Coupled with what happens from a societal standpoint, we have families who are also going through a lot of transition and uncertainties and unknowns. And so when you have an unstable community, meaning those in the space that they live geographically, coupled with a lack of stability in the school system that these kids are trying to actually survive in as opposed to thriving in, then the recipe for many kids can be a disaster. And that's what this book and is all about, is how do we change the systems in ways that allow kids to thrive.
Now that's interesting because so the East School, the East Side School, what's the name of the school you were in?
Yeah, it was the East. It's called the Educational Partnership Organization. And in that school, there were two different grade levels. There's an East Lower School, which was comprised of grades 6 through 8. And there was an East Upper School comprised of grades 9 through 12. But there was one continuous pipeline.
Was it a charter school?
No, it was a wide open school. When we got there, George, the graduation rate was 29% when we took over. Mm-hmm. And in that first 3 months, we went back and looked at our data, and that school was destined to have a graduation rate of 19%. Luckily, by the end of the 7th year, putting in new systems, new structures, being consistent, the graduation rate moved from 29% to over 85% in those first 7 years.
So just help me clarify. It was part of the Rochester School District, or it was?
Yes.
But how did you operate independently of the Rochester City School District?
Great question. So, in the beginning of that book, I talk about how policy is often created without taking into account the abilities of the leaders and their intellectual capacity. It could be, the ability to look at how to create structures that work for the whole school community. And that's what kind of happened with the East Project. So there was a state and federal statute called receivership. And essentially receivership was, after a deep analysis by the state and federal government, they deemed that Rochester City School District could no longer have responsibility for this school because they had failed this school for so many years. Over 10 consecutive years of being at the lowest of the performance metric. Essentially, they say you can't do it anymore. You have 5 options for the school board. You could turn into a charter. And charter schools were not taking high schools. They want to start off and pre-K,
right,
follow those kids up. You can close the school. Well, East was the oldest school in the community. So symbolically, for the district to close that school and all of its history wasn't going to happen. You can replace half the kids and half the teachers and bring in more kids and more students. That's called, that was this turnaround model that worked in the past. That failed. All the schools that did that were closing 6 years later because they never... I mean, anytime you just move people arbitrarily and say, now this is going to be a magically better place is a foolish proposition. You could give it to the State University of New York, the SUNY system. SUNY had no desire to do that. Or you can give it to an independent receiver. And this would sort of be like someone coming in and leasing the land, right? Where the property owner is still the RCSD, but all the operations within it is given to a separate entity that reports out to the school board. But doesn't report to the school board. So my bosses were the University of Rochester, not the school district. I would report out at school board meetings and work with them, of course. But I knew at the end of the day that the changes that I could make, I had to be cleared by the University of Rochester, which allowed me to be very innovative. But also, I would tell you, the accountability metrics of a university is much higher than the accountability metrics of a school system, with a school board that may or may not be well versed in academics.
May I call you Shaun?
Yeah, man. Please. I prefer that.
I don't want your people he didn't call you Dr. Nelms.
Oh man, no, there are no people. It's just me, man.
So listen, I'm interested because is that system still in place today, or did it revert back into the Rochester School District? That's one part of the question. So let's start with that.
So I left in year 8 when I became the vice president of the university, and I wound up hiring my number 2, who was the principal. She became superintendent, and then the third in command became the principal itself. So we basically, again, the whole idea of keeping it consistent and having the same set of principles. Those individuals who are in the system were applied and were the natural choice by the staff, and so it continued. We're now in year 10. And unfortunately, at the end of this year, the school will go back to the school district. And I say unfortunately because the way in which the legislation reads is schools who are failing, they get the support, financial support, they get the autonomy. But when you start to succeed, then the idea is to get the school back to a system that they were already
failed
in.
in the first place. So that's where
Right.
I'm going to my second part of this.
It's a failing school model, and there's no
Okay.
bridge for once they succeed to sustain that success.
So here's where I'm going with this, because I'm really listening to what you're saying. I want to know then, how do you lead with purpose, empowering others to create lasting change, right? When they are operating within a broken system? Because many of the folks who are listening, who are in the educational setting, won't have the ability. They're limited to how much innovation they can do in the setting that they're in. So you said, unfortunately, it's going back to RSCD, right? So what that means, Rochester's SCD, yes, yeah. Or SCD, yes, or CSD.
Rochester.
Rochester, right? So it's much easier when you have the flexibility and the freedom to do what you've done. But then how do you do that in the system that you are locked into, where you don't have the same freedom of innovation to lead with purpose, to empower others, and create lasting change? Walk me through the quagmire of that limitation to show me how even in that system you can lead others with purpose and create lasting change. You follow that?
Yeah, absolutely, man. 'Cause I'll tell you. So the book that I wrote has 2 parts. So the first is kind of theory, and then it is theory. And then the second one is practice. Because I wanted to have this bridge between, what we say we want to do through research and actually what's the realities of school settings.
Right.
And so speaking to exactly to your point, like there are times in which we can create systems that they function less effective because they're in a disjointed, fragmented ecosystem. And so I'm going to acknowledge this and say that what we tried to prove here is that instead of focusing on arbitrary metrics and arbitrary structures, make the system reflect the needs of those people who it's going to benefit most: students, parents, teachers. Because those folks are there forever. Administrators come and go. Mm-hmm. Parents, students, and teachers, they're there for the duration. And so the idea was that if we build capacity, meaning helping people get smarter about the work, and the second principle is distributed leadership model, where you create systems and structures that people own the success and the failure of the outcomes equally. People are more vested into the success of that, even beyond the single heroic figure. So it was important for me to not come in and say this was Shaun's plan. This was co-constructed with teachers, parents, kids. So when we designed our curriculum, we didn't go out and buy curriculum from an outside source. We started to create it ourselves over the course of 10 years. Mm-hmm. So when someone comes in after I leave or after the University of Rochester is done, they say, we want to change the math curriculum. What you're essentially saying is all the work that you put in for the last 10 years, teachers, kids, parents, it doesn't matter anymore because we're going to do something different. Those teachers should rise up. Those parents should rise up and say, this is working. We're outperforming every other school in the district. Why would we change it to lower the standard to something else? Some people conflate the words equity and equality, and it drives me a little crazy at times. So one of the things that we were accused of when we were there is that, well, you spend more on your kids, your kids have more advantages, and therefore it's unfair. And I said, but if that's what it requires for kids to go to college, to go to the military, to go to work, prepare, have a graduation move from 29% to 85%, then focus on getting that in all the schools, right? Don't take that away so that all the kids in the system fail equally. Like, that's not equity. That's having an equal standard of like low expectations. And so that was just critically important for us. So So what we wanted to do is to make sure that those who own the system most, the teachers, the parents, the kids, the administrators, that they co-construct the space that they want. So, often we go into a system, right? We could have walked into East when it was 29% and said, oh my God, what's wrong? Start blaming parents are lazy, kids don't want to come to school, teachers don't do this, administrators don't do that. We actually asked the question, what happened? Like, how did we get here? And so part two of the book, I give some examples of like, how do we get here? I give some examples, not just from East, but from other schools, experiences I've had. And it's important for me not to write the East story. The East story is still happening, and it's their story. Like
Right.
I shouldn't write someone else's narrative, but I do share some examples of things that within the book that demonstrate what happened, what was happening in that school. I honestly think was criminal, and that we had to acknowledge that and acknowledge that people were surviving and failing in a system because there was no system. So the first thing was to create the system with them. So no matter if it's the U of R or anybody else in place, that they're anchoring themselves back into the system,
All right. So let's
back
go
into their
back.
why.
Let me go back to the leadership question. So
Sure.
I'm hearing you say, as principle one, is build the new thing together with your team and hold them accountable for the success and the failure of that. Right now, you have to build. What if you don't have the ability to change the team that you have? In other words, you're working with what you got. And how do
Yeah.
you get that group to respond in the way that you would want to get the results that you want?
Well, I think there's two words you can think about. One is efficacy. So you have to create a system which people believe they have the ability to achieve a desired result. That implies that the desired result is known and understood and internalized. So, not just say you could be better, but be better at what? How do you get there? So that's efficacy. The other thing is empowerment. Once you get people to believe by understanding the root cause of an issue, they can actually change it, then you got to make a thoughtful decision as a leader to empower them in ways that you have to then get out of the way, right? So you can't say, hey, you're empowered to make change. I'm going to micromanage everything that you do in the system until you do it the way that I want to do it. So just like I'm holding folks accountable for the work, I expect them to hold me accountable too for letting them take risk and chances and innovate within like a bounded structure. So people could just go out and do what they wanted to do. It was some bounded autonomy. They had to work within a structure and a system. But at the same time, if you wanted to try something, it was the conversation about what you wanted to try that was more important to me and meaningful than what you were going to try. Meaning, what was your intentionality around making this pivot? And getting people to express that is a form of professional development.
So when you say leading with purpose, by the way, we're talking with Shaun Nelms. He is I'm gonna go in with his business part. He's the CEO of Nelms Consulting Group, but he's also a vice president of community partnerships at the University of Rochester. And Shaun, so when you title your book "Leading with Purpose," right? That means that as a leader, I have a responsibility. And so going back to that notion of leading with purpose, what happens when the leadership is not purposeful? What does that look like, and how do you correct that?
What it looks like is 29% graduation rate.
Gotcha.
What it looks like is parents who don't come to the PTA meetings. Looks like it's kids who don't come to school. Looks like kids fighting in the hallways, right? In a work environment, it's people leaving right at 5 o'clock. It's people, calling, using all their sick days when it's possible. It's having constant turmoil within your union organizations and unionized labor, right? So you can feel and see what happens when people don't lead with purpose. You can also see examples and clear examples of when people are leading with purpose and being led with purpose, meaning it's co-constructed and it's owned, where people flourish. There's a really good book called Reframing Organizations by Bowman and Deal, and it lists a bunch of different organizations who actually demonstrate and model this ability to create ecosystems of success. One example in the latest edition was Wegmans. We have Wegmans, a food market here in Rochester, another in Syracuse too. I can, a good example of that is when you go out of state and you go to another grocery store and you're trying to find a product and someone points over to the left and says somewhere over there. You don't get that at Wegmans. People will put down the pallet, walk you over, show you the example, right? So there's cultures that are built where people are empowered in the system to have ownership in the product that they're producing. And so even in my consulting work, I don't take a bunch of clients because I really want to focus on the individuals who really want to do this work. And for those CEOs and for those leaders who really want to lean in, we unpack like to what extent, how was your culture developed and understood by those that you lead? Was it your plan? Was it their plan? Was it anchored into something? Like what centers your work? Which means once you identify that, then you're much better able to then center the actions that it takes to remind ourselves the work that we're going to do. And then by doing that, people start to trust you. They start to have relationships, and they're more apt to come to you and say, I know we want to move in this direction. We tried this 10 years ago, and here are some cautionary tales that are important. That's when you start to see systems and cultures come together. And so I would say that two things have to happen. One is you have to, again, have the efficacy and empowerment. Then you also have to create this relational trust where people are
situational trust, you said?
Relational trust.
Oh, relational trust.
Relational trust, yeah, where people are going to, honestly understand that when we all come to the table, that we are displaying a sense of competence, meaning we're smart about something or we're trying to become smart about something, and we know we're not smart about something. Like knowing what you're not smart about is also a form of competence, right? And then also character. That when I show up in this space, I'm coming here with all the integrity. I'm loyal to the absent, meaning I'm not going to badmouth your colleague just to you to gain favor. So when you start to balance this confidence and this character, you develop this relational trust where the entire work environment becomes cohesive and starts to move in an organized fashion.
So how then can leaders? So Shaun, in the take with part of our conversation, let's give some real practical things for the C-suite leader, for the new for the newly minted leader, or a leader that is building a new team, and all the things that you talked about, the building and relational trust, empowering them and working together. You got me thinking about some things. And so let's talk about some practical take with ideas that you think are really critical to rebuild the team that you have to get the results that you want.
All right, so I'm gonna give you the in chapter 17 in the book, I outline several tips, 6 tips, and the first one is to be humble and model vulnerability, right? So that means you have to, again, when I talk about being competent and incompetent, saying that you don't know something. I give a real good example. This reading teacher in the book, where she was the best person to teach the school system around this reading initiative. I pretended to be, and I failed. Like it was clear to me that I didn't know what I was doing, and so did everyone else. Right? So being humble and modeling vulnerability is a step in the direction of displaying character and competence. Second is to understand the root cause of the issue, and this is why I talk about asking the question, what happened, as opposed to what's wrong. 3, define your moral purpose or your moral principles before moving into action. So often we come in, we see a problem, we put in a 10-point plan to fix it, and you never explain to people why that's important to be fixed in the first place, the type of damage that it's causing or lack of production that it's causing, and then how will these actions actually solve the issue that you just explained. So if you don't identify the root causes, that's number 2, you can never really move to action. So you have to define yet moral purpose and principles in that root cause. 4 is you got to prioritize organizational coherence. It means you have to establish a common understanding of what drives the work of building equity or efficiency in the system. You got to understand the gaps towards doing that. You got to establish critical steps for process improvement. The 5th would be the person. It would be those 2 together. And then the 6th would be you got to distribute leadership and practice accountability. That's kind of 5 and 6. You got to let that work happen naturally within the system, then also practice accountability. And those are the steps within those 6 steps that focuses the work.
When you have failed, what did you not do? Hmm.
I'm sorry, I missed one too. Transformation requires collaborating with the community, so the community of learners as well. What did I not do? I think sometimes I did not respect the historical nature of the problem.
Mm.
Right. So I didn't understand, some people, I always tell folks, whenever you're changing a system, there are people in the system that you're trying to push to change who at some point created the thing that you're trying to change. Oftentimes they've been promoted and admired for for that system, right? So someone who put something together 10 years ago, it's innovative, they get promoted. Now you're coming in 10 years later saying that was not the right decision to make. And because of that, we're going to change it. And the whole time you're trying to revolutionize the work. And the person who you're asking to change it is the same person. It's their pet project, it's their baby. And so you have to come in and you have to acknowledge that at some point that decision had value to the organization. At some point, someone thought it was effective. And in fact, at some point, it probably was effective.
Hmm.
So people have to see themselves in version 2.0 of that intervention, that shift. And they have to see in version 2.0 that they have value, added value to the next iteration of it. And so I think where I stumbled in the past is, I just assumed everybody, I mean, the data says it was failing. The results we weren't getting the results that we want, but I didn't take into account that perhaps the results that we were getting, even though they weren't where they should be, was much better than it was 4 or 5 or 2 years ago. And so just making sure that you understand the community of learners, community of folks that you work with gives you a little bit more of an insight about how to pivot and move strategically.
You know, part of leadership is overcoming resistance and, you know, getting the systems to work often takes time. And sometimes you don't have the time to do that. And so I know that that's a particular struggle that many leaders face as well.
Yeah, but I think, again, I think you have to inspect what you expect first. So you have to go in, you have to understand what the issues are. And I think most leaders, if they understand that, can create a multi-year, multi-month, whatever process that those who you report to can understand that you're being intentional about how you're moving. You're not ignoring that the gap has to be filled, by the next quarter, fiscal quarter. But you also want to be honest and say, nobody can make this change sustain itself unless we deal with these core principles first. And you can't fire your way out of stuff. People always want to say, someone's always telling me, people change or you change people. Here's the reality. If you've invested, this is what we did at East. We had 8 years before I left investing in the teachers and the administrators. If someone said to me, you could fire all the bad ones that you want and bring in a new folks, I'm like, dude, I put money and resource and time into those folks for 8 years. And there's no guarantee that who I'm going to bring in next is going to be better suited for where we want to head and directions that we want to go. And so, I think that, of course, if someone is being obstructionist and not doing anything, that's different. But the vast majority of people will lean in. They will, they will move in a direction that creates coherence within the organization if they truly understand the root causes of what they're trying to fix and they see themselves as having value in that change management. And then it's our job as leaders to articulate that to our bosses, our higher ups, in ways that acknowledge a sense of urgency, that show our competence around trying to mitigate whatever our charge has been when we came in, but to also be humanistic about it and say, you're asking me to do something, we don't have the infrastructure. So this is what I need. You're asking me to do something and I don't have the right team because they don't understand this particular software, right? So you can apply that fix, that solution, what you leave with, to every situation. But from a leader's perspective, you have to be able to articulate that in ways that allow those who are supervising to give you space and grace to make the changes that are required.
Any final thoughts, Shaun?
No, this has been a great conversation. I just, again, I appreciate the time. The book definitely has some education vignettes in it, but I had a group of individuals read this before I published it. self-published, and I intentionally had people who were not in education read it. And it was a blessing to have them all say, this is not just a book for education. This is a book for folks who are trying to change and understand complex settings that they're in. So I hope the audience has an opportunity to take a look, or it's on Amazon. The book's on Amazon, and it's also on audiobook, iTunes, and Amazon Audio as well. So
Shaun is spelled Shun, Nelms, Nelms, because when you think of Shaun, you go the other way, but it's Shaun, right?
It's
Shaun.
Shaun.
That's right. It's Shaun.
That's right. That's right.
Leading with purpose, empowering others to create lasting change. And yes, this is in an educational setting because Shaun is an educator. But what I like about the conversation is the high level thinking that we can elevate to get the results that we want within our teams. And I think that's the key. I think many people will take, will get what they need from this conversation. So Dr. Shaun Nelms, thank you so much. He is the Vice President for Community Partnerships at the University of Rochester. And I'm going to leave you with this, since you indicated your love for the Buffalo Bills. I'm going to leave you with this. Wide right, my brother. Yeah. Fair enough. Shaun, you're a good sport. Inspiration for the nation. I can't even say inspiration for the nation.